Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
I would say that, I love Jesus with my mind, but not completely with my heart. I still wrestled with difficulties and struggling with lust and pornography. It's kind of crazy that being brought back to life would mean that I'd go all in, but I don't see how else I could live.
We've all experienced it. You run into a friend from the past, but there's something different. They are changed. Maybe there is a calm where there once was a storm. Maybe there is gentleness instead of harshness. There's a new passion, a new life. What changed? Welcome to Brought Back to Life, a podcast where we explore stories of ordinary transformation.
Hey, producer Luke here, just to remind you, I encourage you to listen all the way to the end of the episode for an important message from Brought Back to Life sponsor, Seattle's Union Gospel Mission.
My name is Tyler, and I was brought back to life when I fully surrendered the battle that I was fighting, white-knuckling devotion to Jesus. I came to know Jesus at a young age. I grew up in a household that you probably wouldn't expect for a pastor. Mom was addicted to abusive men and drugs and alcohol, and consequently, we moved a lot. At times we lived in shelters, we were homeless and lived in our car at different seasons. And I went to 3 different elementary schools around Tacoma at 5 different times. So I got used to knowing that feeling of being the new kid and trying to figure out how to make friends and assimilate and connect with other people. But I always kind of had this desire to be normal. And for what that looked like, that meant like trying to get the house when we had one to be clean and get my brothers prepared for when mom came home, that we anticipated what the expectations were. I always thought that because I never chose the same things that mom chose, that I wasn't affected by those things. And it's taken me a long time to realize that that wasn't exactly true. But we'll get to that in a minute. The chaos that I grew up with, that desire to feel normal, we ended up finding a way to find a little bit more normalness. The hospitality of the church became known to us. At 8 years old, I packed my brothers up. They were 5, 4, and 3 years old. It's kind of crazy to think about that today. I don't even know what that would look like to have those kind of kids come into my church without an adult present. But we tried the church that was 2 blocks down the street. Big, beautiful stone Baptist building. And my brothers tore curtains, kicked the doors down. We're not about it. They felt like it was more school. But somehow God grabbed my heart. And so from the ages from 8 to 17, I found myself going to church regularly. And my parents not being involved with it. My parents weren't married. My mom dropped out of high school to have me, and then fell in a bad lot of partying and abusive men. And so we had, constant turnover of negative male influence in our house. And I always use those things as the example of what not to do. And I thought it didn't affect me. And so the warmth and hospitality of the church, though, was awesome. If you have been a part of a church for a long time, bus ministry and other ministries that bring kids to church. I was that kid that came on that bus that was able to go to youth camp because of generosity of others. Things were crazy at home. Jesus didn't solve all the static and noise that was happening in my house, but he gave me hope that I wasn't stuck there. And so it became central in my life. Actually, it was something that I ended up becoming mocked over and wrestled with. I met my wife through the church and had a regular influence of that into my life. My wife and I started dating at 19, and I got married at 22. And I would say that I love Jesus with my mind. But not completely with my heart. I still wrestled with difficulties and struggling with lust and pornography, and even into after we got married, I'm wrestling with these things. We'd attend church lightly, we'd go once a month or something, but it wasn't the central focus. It wasn't the thing that we, it was just when it was convenient. Actually, one of the catalysts that helped bring me back to life was when my 3-year-old daughter started asking questions of faith. Turned out my mother-in-law was investing in her and started sowing some seeds of faith in there. And I remember hearing a story from my wife talking about, look, it's the cross that Jesus died on. And she's talking about the power poles down the street. At 3 years old, I realized that, I needed to kind of straighten some things up. And that's when really my battle with like my strength of trying to follow Jesus came into play, where it was like, I didn't want to tell my daughter we're going to live this way and not live that way. The hypocrisy for me was going to be too much. And so we started going to church more regularly. We went to a very large church and started attending more faithfully. And then they started talking about small group. And, of a church of, 2,000 plus, there was opportunity to get involved in small groups. And it was that community that started to change our life. It was like this, that brought the presence of realizing that my sin nature, the desire for lust and pornography was not the right way to live, but I kept white knuckling and trying to do it in my own strength. I'd stop and I'd feel guilty and I'd confess and I'd repent and then I'd drop it and then I'd fail and I'd feel bad and I'd beat myself up. We apprenticed to lead a group while I was struggling. We led a group while I was struggling. The church started coming to me and saying, hey, we'd like to see you lead in a higher capacity, help other people lead the way that you lead. And I knew I couldn't go any further than we were involved. I probably shouldn't have been involved that far. And 4 times the church came to us and said, hey, we'd love to see you help other people lead like this. And I told them, no, I don't have time. I owned a business. I was an entrepreneur. I got into the family business. That was my second business. Started the first one at 19, the second one at 25. And, was working 60 hours a week, trying to figure out how to be a good father, a good business person, trying to figure out how to get involved in church and all these things and trying to figure out how to make them all work. And I had these little boxes and compartments that separated everything for that. All the meanwhile, inside I'm struggling with lust and the temptation and all of these things. And it was difficult. The 4th time they came to us and they said, we'd love to see you lead in a higher capacity. I said, okay, well, here's a great excuse. No one can lead my group. So who's going to lead? And I thought it was the perfect answer for them to get off my back. And they're like, well, just take it to your group and pray about it. And I'm like, fine, but I know what's going to happen. So very full-heartedly, I go in there, I rush straight in and I share it with the group and crickets. Nobody says a word. We finish our prayer time in group and we pack up and we're driving home. And I was like, I was right. I knew that nobody was going to take up in this opportunity. And a couple that I thought were too busy, but had the character, turned out they had the capacity as well to lead, said, we'd love to lead the group to see where God's following you. And that's where the moment hit that I was like, oh crap, this dual nature life, this sin nature, this trying to pursue holiness, these don't work together. And it was in that moment that I answered prayer that I said, okay, God, I can't do this anymore. And I surrendered. I said, I can't fight this fight anymore. I need your strength. I surrendered. And it doesn't happen this way for everyone, but God kind of cured me of that. We put healthy boundaries in it. I had a honest conversation with God, which was hard. And then I had to have an honest conversation with my wife, which was even harder. And I shared with her that I was struggling with these things. And I expected to be kicked out of the house or having to sleep on the couch. And what I was met with was a compassionate and forgiving grace and a depth of love that I didn't expect and an embrace. As I said, we put some boundaries in place for that, but that temptation is one that has been not as prevalent as it has now. It's everywhere, so you got to be careful what you put in your body, in your eyes especially. But that space was something that I was able to surrender, and we took that next step. We started coaching other group leaders, and before we knew it, we started another group, put a leader in place, and started a third group. And my wife is like, hey, I want to know people, and I want to love them, and I want to spend time with them. All the time I'm still doing a business and trying to figure out how to be a dad and all the other things that are going on. And before we knew it, that coaching became about 20 hours a week of volunteering. And my wife and I were doing it together, and we were excited to be serving together. And then that became a part-time role within the church, and we were serving at 27 years old. We were serving 700 people in group, and I had never been in that high of a leadership capacity before, but all I was teaching them was to follow Jesus. And most of these people were my parents and grandparents' age, and so I was like, what am I going to teach them about following Jesus when they follow Jesus longer than I've been alive? But they were gracious with me. And they saw the passion and the zeal that I had for following Jesus, and it inspired them to help their people do the same thing. Before we knew it, we got to interview to go full time in groups, which was exciting. But I still had this business that I was going for, and I had a good amount of business debt. We had about $50,000 of business debt. It was about 2012, and it was my dad had loaned me the money to get involved in this business, and I was afraid of letting him down. But I knew I was called to be involved more with the church. So we took the full-time job, and for about 4 months, I did both. I did about 60 hours in my business and about 35 hours with the church. And the only way that it worked is my family was involved during the time that we were getting involved in church. And we were praying and trying to sell the business, and God provided a buyer. It didn't look like what I thought it was going to look like. I wanted a big check and I wanted to cash out, and I was like, yes, let's go. And that's not how it looked. We got a check for just enough, and then payments for a year, and that buyer made every single payment, and we walked away from that business debt free. It was a huge win for us. That year, if you're a business owner, we take time off, you don't get paid. And so we took a year off, and we enjoyed vacation, and we enjoyed a steady paycheck of consistency and seeing growth and fruit in the church that we were involved in. It was, that church was figuring out how to operate, how to have momentum, and making adjustments and reorganizations. And so they reorged, and we changed everybody's position and tried to help figure out how to, embrace the mission and go differently. And about a year in, my pastor came to me and said, we think that you should get some more education and prepare yourself for ministry more. And so I said, sure. So I went to Northwest University and started doing their pastoral studies degree and got a certificate in ministry and leadership, all the while working ministry. And at this time we had our third kid had joined us, and figuring out how to balance school and life, and that format really worked really well for us. But I learned not just how to love God with all my mind, started to learn how to love him with all my heart, and how to love him with all my life. And instead of having these compartments, loved Jesus all throughout every area of my life, so that when I'm in school, I'm representing Jesus well. When I'm working, I'm representing Jesus well. When I'm a dad, I'm representing Jesus well. And it was a really beautiful tie between theology and how to live it out. I ended up finishing my undergraduate at Multnomah University, and we had made the decision to go drive down to Portland from the Puyallup area. And I was like, well, I used to drive 600 miles a week for my business. It's not a big deal for us to drive a little bit more. And so once a week I'd drive down there. And what's incredible is over 5 times, that's all. I only drove to Portland 5 times before God had moved us into the Portland area. 30 minutes from the university where I was studying. And I took a youth pastor job at a very, very small church. And we served faithfully down there, and I finished my bachelor's while I was working down there. And it was a crazy busy time, but God used that time to teach us how to be faithful in ministry, how to suffer well. And so, when I finished my bachelor's, I started looking for a different role. I loved working with youth, but I was more passionate about discipleship for adults and helping adults get into groups and that adult discipleship more than kids discipleship. And don't get me wrong, especially having youth age kids now, it's very important to invest in the youth. But for me, I was feeling more called to the adult time. And so we started applying different places, and God called us up to Auburn, and I served as associate pastor up there for about 3.5 years, helping in groups and discipleship and assimilation and that kind of thing. And then we ended up becoming an associate pastor at a church in Tacoma. And this is right before COVID. They were looking for an executive, kind of helping to bring some systems and structures together. And so it was the most interviews that I ever had for any job. They've never hired an outside church or somebody outside their church in their position before. So there were 7 interviews, and they made a decision to bring me on staff. And so I was like, great, let me arrange things where I'm at and then get things ready to go. And so I took 3 weeks off between jobs just to kind of recover and to rest and get ready. And those 3 weeks were the first 3 weeks of COVID lockdown. Now, I never expected to start at a church and build relationships by holding a phone in front of me or a camera in front of me, sharing the message of the gospel with a camera in front of me all the time, or meeting people over Zoom. Those were things that I just never really thought that's how you meet people. I love being with people and shaking their hands and being eyeball to eyeball. But COVID didn't afford us that luxury. And so we went all online, and they brought me on, and we figured out how to be flexible and fluid in ministry. In June, or come about May, when it was permissible, we started figuring out how we could meet. And so in June and July of 2020, we helped develop 90 volunteers in 3 campuses, one in Puyallup, one in Lakewood, and one in Tacoma, and to help the church meet in person again. Hebrews talks about not forsaking the gathering, and that was a passage that we all held close in COVID, but we got to live it out because there was so much fear about getting sick and what that looks like of being, how do we still influence and be a part of this culture and do what we're called to do. After we launched the 3rd campus, my pastor came to me and said, "Hey, I think you're a church planner." And I said, "Well, maybe." I'm not sure. I want to finish my seminary degree. I was about a year away from finishing it. I said, after that, sure, let's talk about it. So that was August, and he comes back to me in November, and he goes, "What's the future of your campus? Are you going to be a church plant, or are you going to be a campus?" My wife and I prayed about it. We thought about it, and we're like, we should be a campus. We have a lot to learn. They do family in a really neat way in this church. The hospitality was something that we wanted to learn from. They did church in a way that most of the churches that we had been to hadn't done. And the pastor says to me, "Well, you're going to need to raise 50% of your salary." And I said, "Well, if that's the case, then I think we're planting." I still wanted to hear from God to confirm that that's what we were supposed to do. And so we'd confirmed that that was what it is. I shared it with my wife. We had prayed and we had fasted about that. And Thursday we had said yes. And Saturday the Lord was like, "Okay, here's what I have for you." And I was like, "This is great, but how do I know this isn't like bad dinner last night? Like the burrito didn't go bad in the stomach, right?" And so I read through most of the book of Acts, and I couldn't get past the passage where the church asks for boldness to share the gospel, even though things are difficult. And I started thinking about what's keeping us from being bold with the gospel. It's not COVID. It's not regulations. It's not people. It's not politics. Our comfort zones are keeping us from being bold. And so that's what really confirmed for us to plant a church. And so in January, we started asking people to join us. We had a real clear picture that we wanted to share what biblical hospitality looked like, which means inviting people to your table, and the table at the coffee shop or at your dining room table, or even tables at church. And 50 people said yes. And so we launched April 2021. We had over 100 people that came, all 6 feet apart, all masked. I preached masked. We sang masked. Everything was all masked. And we were just flexible to see what God was going to do in this space. That was an incredible celebration to reach some of the community in that first Easter. And then we were back to reality, and there's 33 people joined and going in the same mission. That's how Table of Hope was born. That's the name of our church. And our mission is to use our tables to share the gospel, which means that we share meals quite often to help lower the barriers, to help people to be able to connect in relationship. And so we've got a group of people that meet Sundays at 5 for dinner church is what we call it. And as a part of our gathering, we eat together. And it helps model the kind of life that we want everybody to live, to be able to use their table to share the gospel. Another space that we've developed in how to reach our community has been this youth football league called the Puyallup Junior Vikings. And my son got involved, and then the next year I'm coaching, and then we're getting on the board, and now I'm coaching more, and we're seeing over 100 families that need the influence of Jesus in their lives, and some of them know Jesus and some of them don't. And it's incredible how God uses a coach to be able to speak into the life, and how parents let coaches speak in their life. And so we've stepped in that spot to model excellent character, to be able to love on each other. And one of the ways that we use our table to share the gospel is by coaching football and cheer. And so my family's gone all in with it. I've got a football player and 2 cheerleaders. My wife's a team mom and becoming a cheer coach. And if she asked my wife, she'd say she never would have thought that she was going to be a cheer coach. She didn't do cheer, but her mom did, her aunt did. She had it in the family. But my kids are well suited for it. And my kids are a big part. We talk about, we call our family Team Clark, and Team Clark is on mission together. And so when we're out there playing that game, we're serving Jesus. We talk about serving Jesus where we live, work, learn, and play. All 4 of those places are places that we can bring the gospel influence. All places of those have tables too. And that's how we use the table to share the gospel. It's kind of crazy that being brought back to life would mean that I'd go all in, but I don't see how else I could live And so when I talk with other people about what their story looks like and the fight for them to follow Jesus, sometimes that's a part of helping us develop to who we are and to become all-in people. Now, you don't have to plant a church to be all in with Jesus. You could be a faithful worker at Boeing. You could be a faithful worker making sheet metal, whatever the thing is that you do. We've got EMTs, we've got glass builders, we got all kinds of different people from all walks of life that learn how to go all in with Jesus. And that's a big value of ours, is to help people go all in with Jesus. But it starts with turning away and coming back to life from the sin that ensnares.
I can't thank you enough for being on the show to talk about your spiritual death, because without it, you couldn't be brought back to life. Now here's a powerful testimonial from our sponsor, Seattle's Union Gospel Mission.
Helping the lost become found with Seattle's Union Gospel Mission. Seattle's Union Gospel Mission doesn't just provide food and shelter. They offer a path out of homelessness, giving men and women a safe place to recover from addiction and start on the path toward a new life.
I was an alcoholic and drug addict for 49 years. The only time I didn't drink or do drugs was when I was pregnant. One day, I was evicted from my house for an unpaid water bill. It was the first time in my life I was homeless. My family didn't want anything to do with me. I was being abused heavily, and I knew I hit rock bottom. But also I knew God was with me. My ex-husband told me about the mission, and when I walked through those doors, the women there hugged me and said, "Welcome home." I am a different woman today because of them. Thank God for the mission. They saved my life.
Even when it seems impossible to see, hope can be found. Local men and women in our area desperately need a fresh start, and that's what they find at Seattle's Union Gospel Mission. From learning to trust again, to that first hot meal, to a recovery program, and then job training. The mission's recovery programs offer counseling, case management, chemical dependency classes, and so much more. To hear more, volunteer, or donate, visit ugm.org.
Jesus said in the Bible, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die." Do you believe this? We are telling these stories of transformation so you can know and understand the power of Jesus in your own life. If you'd like to learn more about Jesus and how he can bring you back to life, visit us at onpurposely.com/whoisjesus. And if you like Brought Back to Life, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. You can follow Brought Back to Life on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you're listening right now. You can also just tell your smart speaker, play Brought Back to Life podcast.